Lady, I've seen frauds put on better performances than this.
Officer, I'm telling you, I'm a licensed attorney. I'm completing a legal transaction.
You're a suspect. And suspects don't get to talk.
You can drop the innocent act now. Nobody here's buying it.
Officer Pemberton wrenched Dixie's arm behind her back. Then the handcuffs clicked into place. The lobby went completely silent. Dixie stood there silently. She looked straight ahead and didn't struggle on his hold. Officer Pemberton believed he was in control of the situation. He didn't know the situation had already reached the Pentagon. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The lobby of First Meridian Bank smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. Dixie Worth pushed through the glass door at 9:12 in the morning, her leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She wore a cream blazer over dark slacks, her hair pulled back neat and clean. She looked exactly like what she was, a lawyer with somewhere to be and something to do. She joined the short line and waited. The teller who called her forward was young, maybe 22, with a name tag that said Brett. Dixie set her portfolio on the counter, unzipped it, and explained clearly that she needed to complete a wire transfer. A large one. A client's real estate closing was scheduled for that afternoon, and the funds needed to move today. Brian's eyes moved to his screen, then back to Dixie, then back to the screen. I need to call someone, he said. Dixie nodded. Of course. She was good at this. She'd had years of practice. The waiting, the watching, the quiet work of making other people feel comfortable so they could do their jobs. She knew how to stand still and look patient even when her insides were anything but. Brian made his call in a low voice, his back half turned. 2 minutes passed. Then Linda Foster appeared from the back office. She was a white woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of smile that took effort to maintain. She introduced herself as the branch manager and extended a hand. Dixie shook it. I understand you're looking to make a wire transfer, Linda said. That's right. Dixie opened her portfolio. I have everything you need. My driver's license, my bar association card, and a signed authorization letter from my client. She laid each item on the counter, one by one, organized and clean. The account information and routing numbers are on the last page. Linda picked up each document. She held Dixie's driver's license up like she was checking it against the light. She turned the bar card over in her fingers. She read the authorization letter slowly, much more slowly than the words required. The woman behind Dixie in line shifted her weight. Dixie kept her expression neutral. I'm going to need a moment to verify the account, Linda said. Take your time. Linda disappeared into the back. Richard Foster, no relation to Linda, just a coincidence of names, sat in the waiting area to Dixie's left. He was 67 years old, a retired school teacher, with big hands and a quiet way of watching things. He had come to the bank to update his direct deposit information. Simple errand. 30 minutes, maybe. But he wasn't reading the magazine in his lap anymore. He was watching Dixie stand at that counter, and he was watching the clock on the wall. 6 minutes passed. Then 8. Linda returned with the same careful smile. I'm sorry for the wait, she said. Unfortunately, we're showing some irregularities with this account, and I'm not going to be able to process this transaction today. Dixie's voice stayed level. What kind of irregularities? I'm not able to get into specifics, but… Ms. Foster. Dixie's tone was polite, but it had an edge now. The kind of edge that came from a decade of courtrooms and depositions. I have provided you with a government-issued photo ID, my bar card, and a client authorization that includes the account number, the routing number, and 2 forms of contact verification. I would like to understand, specifically, what is irregular. Linda blinked. The smile got tighter. I understand your frustration. I'm not frustrated, Dixie said. I'm asking a question. Linda clasped her hands together on the counter. These are the policies of this branch, and I'm following them to protect our customers. I am the customer. Silence. I'd like to speak with your supervisor, Dixie said. I am the supervisor, Linda said. For just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, something passed across Linda Foster's face. Not embarrassment, not guilt, satisfaction. She reached for her desk phone. Dixie watched her dial. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She stood at that counter in her cream blazer with her documents laid out perfectly in front of her, and she understood with complete clarity what was happening. She had understood it from the moment Linda held her driver's license up to the light. Richard set his magazine down in his lap. His jaw was tight. Across the lobby, Brian pretended to type something. Linda spoke quietly into the phone, her body angled away from Dixie, her voice too low to make out the words. She didn't need to hear them. She already knew. The wait was 11 minutes. Dixie stood at that counter for every single one of them. She didn't pace. She didn't check her phone. She kept her documents laid out in front of her. License, bar card, authorization letter. And she waited. Around her, the bank continued its quiet morning routine. A teller counted bills. A printer hummed. Brian found reasons to look at everything except her. Richard didn't move either. He sat in his chair with the magazine closed in his lap and watched the front door. When Officer Dion Pemberton walked in, he filled the doorway for a moment before letting the glass door swing shut behind him. He was a big man, mid-40s, with a thick neck, and the kind of walk that said he'd never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. His hand rested on his belt. His eyes swept the lobby once. They landed on Linda. He walked straight to her. Not to Dixie. Not to the counter. To Linda Foster, who met him with relief spreading across her face like he was the answer to a problem she'd been carrying all morning. They spoke in low voices. Pemberton nodded along. He didn't look at Dixie once. Dixie watched this. She picked up her bar card from the counter. She held it out toward him, a clear, deliberate gesture. "Officer," she said, "my name is Dixie Worth. I'm a licensed attorney. I have documentation for every aspect of this transaction. I'd like the opportunity to explain." Pemberton finally looked at her. He reached out, took the bar card from her hand, and set it on the counter without reading it, without even glancing at it, like it was a gum wrapper. "Ma'am," he said, "let the adults handle this." The woman in the teller line made a small sound. Dixie heard it. She didn't look away from Pemberton. "I am an adult," she said. "I'm also an officer of the court, and I have the right to understand the basis for—" I said, "Let us handle it." He turned back to Linda. Dixie felt the heat rise in her chest. She pressed it down. She had pressed things down like that her whole life. In law school when a professor spoke over her. In courtrooms when opposing counsel pretended she wasn't there. In 100 lobbies and conference rooms and parking lots. She knew how to contain it. Officer Pemberton. She read his name tag. She always read name tags. I have not raised my voice. I have not made any threatening gestures. I have presented valid identification and a signed legal document. Can you tell me what specific grounds you have for— Ma'am. He turned around slowly, like she was testing his patience. I'm going to need you to stop talking. Right now. The lobby went very still. Richard's hands pressed flat against his thighs. Brian stared at his keyboard. Dixie looked at Dion Pemberton, really looked at him, and understood that nothing she said was going to matter. Not her credentials, not her composure, not her blazer or her portfolio or the perfectly organized documents still sitting on that counter. He had already decided what she was the moment Linda Foster called him. She reached for her phone. She wasn't calling anyone. She was going to record this herself. She had that right, and she knew it. Her hand was steady when she reached into the side pocket of her portfolio. Pemberton moved fast. His hand closed around her wrist before her fingers touched the phone. "Don't." His voice was low and hard. "Let go of my wrist." Her voice didn't shake. "Let go of my wrist right now." He didn't let go. The handcuffs came off his belt. The click of them was the loudest sound in the room. Louder than the printer. Louder than the air conditioning. Louder than the small gasp that came from somewhere in the teller line. "You are being detained for suspected fraud," Pemberton said. "This is unlawful." Dixie's voice was clear, loud enough for the room. "This is an unlawful detention, and I am stating that clearly for any recording currently being made. Because someone was recording." She could feel it. Richard had his phone out, held low against his knee, his big hand keeping it steady. He had seen this before. Not this, exactly, but this. Pemberton walked Dixie toward the front door. Her portfolio sat on the counter. Her documents, the license, the bar card, the authorization letter, still laid out neat and organized, like she'd never left, like she was coming back. The glass door swung open. The morning sun hit her face. She did not look down. The back seat of a police cruiser is not built for comfort. It is built to contain. The seat is hard plastic, molded in a single piece, with no give, no padding, nothing soft about it. There are no door handles on the inside. The partition between the front and back is thick, scratched plexiglass, and through it, Dixie could see the back of Dion Pemberton's head as he settled into the driver's seat and reached for his clipboard. He didn't say a word to her. She didn't say a word to him. The parking lot of First Meridian Bank sat quiet outside the window. A woman with a stroller crossed the lot without looking at the cruiser. A man in a delivery uniform loaded packages from a truck. The world kept moving like nothing had happened, because for most of the world, nothing had. Dixie sat with her hands cuffed behind her back and kept her breathing even. She thought about her client. The closing was at 2 o'clock. The wire had to clear before noon for the title company to release the keys. She had 47 minutes. She thought about her phone. It was still in the side pocket of her portfolio, which was still sitting on the counter inside the bank. Pemberton hadn't taken it during the arrest. He'd moved too fast, too confident, too certain she wasn't worth the extra steps. But that wasn't the only phone she had. In the inside pocket of her blazer, thin, flat, almost invisible against the lining, was a second phone, a backup. Her father had given it to her 3 years ago after a late night at the office, when she'd called him from a parking garage with a dead battery. He'd handed it to her the following Sunday over dinner, without making a big deal of it. "Keep it charged," he'd said. "Keep it on you." She had. When Pemberton grabbed her wrist and the struggle happened, brief, ugly, over in seconds, the impact had done something she hadn't planned and couldn't have planned. It had triggered the phone's emergency SOS feature, a function she had configured herself, at her father's insistence, 18 months ago on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when setting it up felt more like humoring him than anything else. The phone had auto-dialed. Colonel Lucy Montana was at her desk on the second floor of the Pentagon's E-ring when her phone rang. She answered on the second ring the way she always answered. Name, rank, ready. What she heard stopped her cold. A man's voice, hard and dismissive. "You are being detained for suspected fraud." A woman's voice, controlled and deliberate, clearly speaking for anyone who might be listening. "This is an unlawful detention, and I am stating that clearly for any recording currently being made." Then the sound of a door, movement, outdoor air. Montana was already on her feet. She pulled up the contact record tied to the auto dial number. The name came up immediately. She cross-referenced it against the Pentagon directory, a process that took under 60 seconds when you knew the system and you moved fast. Dixie Worth. She knew that name. Everyone in the building who had ever worked near General Marvin Worth knew that name. He kept one photograph on his desk. Not his service portrait, not his commendations. A snapshot from a picnic, his daughter maybe 7 years old, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Montana walked down the hallway without breaking stride. She opened General Worth's office door without knocking. He looked up from his desk. She told him in 11 words, "Dixie's phone triggered an SOS. She's been detained at a bank." Marvin Worth stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not move quickly in the way that looked like panic. He moved the way he always moved, with the complete and total certainty of a man who had commanded operations on 3 continents and never once questioned whether his next action was the right one. He picked up his phone and called the county chief of police. Not a dispatcher. Not a non-emergency line. The chief. 4 minutes had passed since Montana heard Dixie's voice. Inside the cruiser, Pemberton was still filling out his paperwork when his radio crackled. He ignored it. Then his personal cell phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Sergeant Brooke. He answered with mild irritation. Whatever Brooke said in the first 3 seconds changed the temperature of the entire car. Pemberton went still. Through the plexiglass partition, Dixie watched the back of his neck turn red. She didn't know what was being said. She didn't need to. She watched Dion Pemberton's shoulders rise toward his ears, and then, slowly, drop. The physical deflation of a man who had just realized the size of his mistake. She said nothing. She waited. Pemberton sat in the front seat for a long moment after the call ended. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared through the windshield at the bank's glass front doors like he was doing math in his head, and kept getting the wrong answer. Dixie watched him from the back seat. She didn't ask what the call was about. She didn't say anything at all. She had learned a long time ago that silence could be its own kind of power. That sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply wait and let other people reveal themselves. Pemberton revealed himself. He got out of the car, opened the rear door, and reached in to unlock the handcuffs. His hands were not gentle about it, but they weren't rough either. They were the hands of someone performing a task they didn't want to perform and going through the motions as quickly as possible. The cuffs came off. Dixie brought her wrists forward and held them in her lap for a moment. There were marks on her skin, shallow, pink, already fading. She looked at them once, then looked up. Pemberton was already walking toward the bank entrance. She followed him inside. The lobby had changed in the 15 minutes she'd been gone. Word had moved through the room the way it always does, in glances and whispered questions and the particular stillness of people pretending not to pay attention while paying very close attention. The woman who had gasped was now near the door. The teller Brian had found something urgent to organize beneath his counter. A couple near the loan office stood close together, watching. Linda Foster was behind her desk. She had gone the color of old paper. Pemberton walked to the center of the lobby and stopped. He looked at Dixie with the expression of a man reading from a script he found personally offensive. "Ms. Worth," he said, "there appears to have been a miscommunication regarding the nature of this situation. You're free to go." Dixie looked at him. "That's it?" she said. "Ma'am, you put me in handcuffs in front of this entire lobby," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "You grabbed my wrist when I reached for my phone. You told me to stop talking when I cited my legal rights. You didn't read a single document I presented to you." She paused. "And your explanation is miscommunication?" Pemberton's jaw tightened. "I followed the information I was given at the time. By her." Dixie looked directly at Linda Foster. Linda didn't move. "I'm not going to stand here and go back and forth with you about—" "I'm not going back and forth," Dixie said. "I'm making sure everyone in this room heard exactly what you just said." The lobby was completely silent. Richard Foster hadn't moved from his chair. He sat with his hands on his knees, watching. And now, slowly, deliberately, he began to clap. One clap, then another, then another. A woman near the front door joined in. Then a man by the loan office. Pemberton shot them a hard look. Nobody stopped. Linda Foster looked like she wanted to dissolve through the floor. Dixie turned away from all of it. She walked to the nearest open teller window. Not Brian, a different one. A young woman with steady hands who processed the entire transaction without asking a single unnecessary question. The wire transfer cleared in 4 minutes. Dixie zipped her portfolio, picked up her documents from the counter, every one of them exactly where she'd left them, and slipped her bar card back into its sleeve. She walked to the exit. At the door, she stopped. She turned back and looked at the lobby one last time. At Richard, who gave her a single nod. At Linda, who had found something very interesting to study on her desk. At Dion Pemberton, who was standing in the middle of the room looking like a man who had just figured out that the story wasn't over. He was right about that. Dixie pushed through the glass door. Outside, the morning was bright and warm, the kind of day that didn't match what had just happened inside that building. She walked to her car, sat down in the driver's seat, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. She didn't cry. She wasn't built for crying in parking lots, but her hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough that she noticed, and she sat there and breathed until they stopped. Somewhere across the parking lot, 3 separate phones were already uploading video to the internet. She didn't know that yet. She would. The video hit 40,000 views before Dixie finished cooking dinner. She found out the way most people find out about things now. Her phone buzzed once, then twice, then didn't stop. A law school friend. A colleague from the 3rd floor. A cousin she hadn't spoken to in 8 months. The messages were all some version of the same thing. "Is this you? Are you okay? I just saw—" She put down her spatula and picked up her phone. The clip was 40 seconds long, shot from an angle that caught the lobby clearly. Dixie in her cream blazer, hands cuffed behind her back, being walked toward the glass doors by Pemberton. Her face was visible. Her posture was straight. She didn't look frightened. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who knew she had done nothing wrong and couldn't believe this was happening anyway. The caption someone had written underneath it: "Black lawyer arrested at bank for trying to do her job. This is America." Dixie watched it twice. Then she opened the comments. She shouldn't have. By 10 o'clock that night, there were 2 completely different stories circulating about what had happened at First Meridian Bank that morning. The first was straightforward. A black woman, a professional, arrested while conducting legitimate business. Wrong place, wrong assumption, wrong officer. People were angry. People were sharing. The hashtags were moving fast. The second story was quieter, but spreading in a different way. Pushed by accounts with no profile pictures and usernames that were strings of random letters and numbers. This version said something different. It said the arrest had been routine. It said Dixie's release wasn't justice. It was interference. A 4-star general using his rank and his connections to pull his daughter out of a legitimate police investigation. Military privilege. The same system, different uniform. She didn't get justice, one post read. She got rescued. There's a difference. Dixie read that one 3 times. She set her phone face down on the counter and finished cooking dinner. She ate at her kitchen table alone and tasted none of it. By midnight, the department had released a statement. Officer Dion Pemberton had been placed on paid administrative leave pending an internal review. The statement used the phrase, "committed to transparency," twice, and the phrase, "takes all concerns seriously," once. It did not use the words wrong or sorry or unlawful. Sergeant Kevin Brooke had submitted his incident report. Dixie wouldn't see it for weeks, but when she eventually did, she would read it 3 times slowly, the way she read contracts she didn't trust. Brooke had described the arrest as procedurally appropriate given the available information at the time. He had noted that the situation had been resolved without incident. He had not mentioned that he was the one who ordered Pemberton to stand down. Linda Foster appeared on the local evening news at 11:15. She sat across from a reporter in what looked like a conference room, her hands folded on the table, her reading glasses on their beaded chain. She spoke carefully about the responsibility of bank employees to report suspicious activity. She talked about fraud prevention. She used the phrase, "protecting our customers," 4 times. She never said Dixie's name. She didn't have to. Dixie's phone rang at 11:45. It was Ryan Harlan, the managing partner of her firm. His voice had that particular careful quality, soft and measured, every word chosen, that she recognized from the times he delivered bad news to clients. He wasn't delivering it to a client now. He suggested, gently and at length, that it might be wise for her to take a leave of absence, just temporarily, just until things settled. The firm had relationships with several of the banks in the area, he explained. It was a complicated situation. He was sure she understood. Dixie said she did. She hung up. 20 minutes later, her biggest client called. He had seen the news. He was nervous about the association. He wanted to discuss the account. She told him she'd call him back in the morning. She wouldn't. She sat on her couch in the dark for a long time. Then her phone rang again. General Marvin Worth never called past 10 o'clock. It was a rule he'd kept her whole life. Her rest mattered. Her time mattered. He wasn't the kind of father who filled up her evenings with his own needs. But it was almost midnight, and his name was on her screen. She answered. He asked one question. "What do you need?" Dixie stared at the dark window across from her. Outside, the city was still going, still moving. "I need people to believe me," she said. Her father was quiet for a long moment. "The truth doesn't ask for permission," he said. "It just needs enough room to stand up." Dixie closed her eyes. She didn't sleep much that night. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, the shaking in her hands finally stopped. She was at her desk by 8. Not 8:30. Not 9. 8 o'clock, when the building was still quiet, and the overnight cleaning crew was wrapping up on the floor below, and the coffee in the break room was still fresh. Dixie set her case files on her desk, hung her coat on the hook behind the door, and sat down. She had not taken a leave of absence. She had thought about Ryan Harlan's phone call for most of the weekend, not because it tempted her, but because she wanted to understand it clearly before she responded to it. She wanted to know exactly what she was refusing and why. That was how she operated. She didn't react. She decided. By Saturday afternoon, she had decided. She opened her email and typed 4 sentences. Ryan, I appreciate your concern. I will not be taking a leave of absence. I have done nothing that requires one. I will be in the office Monday morning, and I expect my case files to be on my desk. She hit send. His response came Sunday evening. It was 3 paragraphs long. She read the first line of each paragraph and closed it. The office filled up around 9. People moved carefully around her, extra polite, extra busy, the particular performance of colleagues who have seen something uncomfortable and don't know which direction it's going to fall. A paralegal she'd worked with for 2 years said good morning without making eye contact. A junior associate found a reason to use the copier near her office 3 times before 10 o'clock. Dixie worked. At noon, she ate lunch at her desk. At 2 o'clock, she had a client call that had nothing to do with any of it, and she handled it the same way she handled every client call. Thoroughly, precisely, without wasted words. At 3:15, Mara Orban walked through her office door. Mara was 41 years old and had the kind of face that looked like it had heard every excuse ever invented and found all of them lacking. She wore no jewelry except small gold studs and carried a bag that looked like it had survived a decade of courtrooms, which it had. She had been referred by a colleague Dixie trusted completely, a woman who had said simply, "If I were in trouble, Mara is who I'd call." Mara sat down across from Dixie's desk, put her bag on the floor, and looked at her directly. "You shouldn't represent yourself in this," she said. No preamble. "I'm aware," Dixie said. "Not because you aren't capable. Because you are too close to it. You'll be thinking like the person it happened to, instead of thinking like the attorney who can win." Mara folded her hands on the desk. "I've handled 14 civil rights cases in the last 6 years. I've won 11 of them. The other 3 are still in motion." Dixie looked at her. "What's your strategy?" Mara laid it out clearly. A formal civil rights complaint filed immediately. Simultaneous records requests, Pemberton's complete body camera footage from the department, all internal communications from First Meridian Bank related to the transaction and the call to police, and every document connected to the department's internal review of the arrest. They would move fast and file everything at once, so neither the bank nor the department had time to coordinate their responses before the requests were already on record. "There's something else," Mara said. "The pattern. One incident is an incident. A pattern is a case. I want to know if Linda Foster has done this before." Dixie nodded slowly. She had been thinking the same thing. "I want to handle the deposition prep myself," Dixie said. "And I want to be in the room for every—" "Dixie!" Mara's voice was not unkind. "You're going to want to fight this the way you fight your own cases. I understand that. But your job right now is to be the client." She paused. "Let me be your weapon." The room was quiet for a moment. Dixie had spent her entire career being the one who said things like that to frightened people sitting across her desk. She knew how it felt to mean it. She extended her hand. Mara shook it. The filings went in the following morning. All of them, simultaneously, before 9 o'clock. Records requests to the department. Records requests to the bank. The formal civil rights complaint, detailed and precise, with Richard Foster listed as a witness. Dixie drove home that evening later than usual. She stood in her kitchen, picked up Mara's business card from the counter where she'd left it, and held it for a moment. Then she set it back down, opened her laptop, and got back to work. The call came on a Tuesday. 1 week after the filings, Dixie was in the middle of reviewing a contract when her phone rang. She saw Mara's name on the screen and picked up before the second ring. "The department responded," Mara said. Something in her tone made Dixie set the contract down. "They turned over footage," Mara continued, "but there's a problem." Dixie was at Mara's office in 30 minutes. Mara had the footage pulled up on her laptop when Dixie walked in. She turned the screen so they could both see it and pressed play. The timestamp in the corner read 9:23 a.m., 11 minutes after Dixie had entered the bank. Pemberton's body camera showed him walking through the lobby doors. Linda Foster was already moving toward him. They exchanged a few words. Then the camera cut. The next timestamp read 9:31 a.m., 8 minutes gone. Just like that. A clean jump from Pemberton entering the building to the moment he was already walking Dixie toward the exit in handcuffs. The entire middle, every word exchanged, every document dismissed, every moment Dixie had cited her rights and been told to stop talking, was simply not there. Equipment malfunction, Mara said flatly. That's what the department is calling it. Dixie stared at the screen. 8 minutes, she said. 8 minutes, Mara confirmed. The exact 8 minutes that would show everything. Yes, Dixie leaned back in her chair. She was quiet for a moment, turning it over the way she turned over every piece of evidence she'd ever been handed. Looking for the angle, the weakness, the place where it didn't hold up. They know we know, she said. Of course they do, Mara said. And they don't care. Because right now, they don't have to. She closed the laptop. Without footage of the escalation, it's your account against Pemberton's report. And his report says you were uncooperative, and the situation was resolved appropriately. Dixie said nothing. We challenge it, Mara said. I'm already drafting a motion to compel a full forensic review of the camera hardware and the department's footage servers. If that camera actually malfunctioned, there will be a record of the malfunction. Error logs, maintenance records, something. If there isn't, she let that sit for a second. That tells us something, too. Dixie nodded slowly. What else do we have? Mara's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. That's actually why I wanted you here in person. She opened a different file on her laptop, pulled up an email. Richard Foster contacted the office this morning, she said. He has his own footage. Richard had shot it from his chair in the waiting area, his phone held low against his knee, his big hand keeping it as steady as he could manage. It was 22 seconds long. The angle wasn't perfect, slightly low, slightly tilted, but it was clear enough. It showed Pemberton arriving. It showed him walking past Dixie to Linda Foster, without acknowledging her. It showed Dixie extending her bar card toward him. It showed Pemberton taking it from her hand and setting it on the counter without looking at it. And it showed the moment he grabbed her wrist. Dixie watched it without speaking. Then she watched it again. He said he thought someone might need it, Mara said quietly. Dixie looked up. Get it out. Today. I already called him. He's ready. Mara paused. Dixie, this doesn't fill the 8 minutes, but it corroborates everything you said happened, and it shows the bar card being dismissed. That matters. The footage went to the media that afternoon. Mara handled the release directly, attaching a brief written statement from Richard and a copy of his witness declaration filed with the civil rights complaint. By 5 o'clock, it was on 3 national news sites. By 7, it was everywhere. Dixie was home when the department's spokesperson appeared on the evening news. She watched it standing in her kitchen, still in her work clothes, a glass of water in her hand. The spokesperson stood in front of the department's building in a pressed uniform and spoke with the practiced calm of someone who had done this many times before. The video, he said, was incomplete and lacking the full context of a complex situation. The department, he said, remained confident that Officer Pemberton had acted in accordance with established protocols. The internal review, he said, was ongoing. Dixie took a slow sip of water. Mara called 30 seconds after the segment ended. Did you watch it? Mara asked. I watched it. Good. There was something almost satisfied in Mara's voice. Let them keep talking, she said. Every word they say in public is a word they'll have to answer for in court. Dixie set her glass down. Then I hope they keep talking for a long time, she said. The court order came through on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 weeks had passed since the initial filings. 2 weeks of motions and counter-motions, of the bank's legal team citing privacy policy and customer confidentiality and every procedural wall they could find to stack between Mara's requests and Linda Foster's records. 2 weeks of the department's spokesperson appearing on local news with careful language about ongoing reviews. But courts move on their own schedule, and Judge Harry Vance had read Mara's motion and signed the order. Mara called Dixie at 3:47 p.m. "We have the bank's internal communications," she said. "All of it. Linda Foster's full record. Every flagged transaction she's submitted in the last 2 years." Dixie was already reaching for her coat. They worked through the files together at Mara's office, side by side at the long conference table with the documents spread out between them. Mara had printed everything: transaction reports, internal memos, flag notifications, complaint records, and organized them into chronological order. It didn't take long to see it. In the past 18 months, Linda Foster had flagged 6 transactions for suspected fraud and contacted law enforcement or bank security in connection with each one. 6 transactions. 6 customers. Every single one of them was black. Dixie sat very still. None of the 6 transactions had been confirmed fraudulent. Not one. In 4 of the cases, the customers had been told only that there were account irregularities, the same vague language Linda had used with Dixie, and sent home without their transactions completed. No explanation given. No follow-up. Just a door politely closed in their face. 2 of the 6 customers had filed informal complaints with the bank afterward. Both complaints had been reviewed internally. Both had been dismissed. Dixie pulled the second dismissed complaint toward her and read it slowly. The customer's name was Harvey Galler, age 71, retired postal worker. He had come to the branch to deposit a cashier's check, the proceeds from the sale of his home of 31 years. He had spent 4 hours inside First Meridian Bank, 4 hours of questions and holds, and a rotating cast of employees asking him to verify things he had already verified. He had finally been allowed to leave without completing the deposit, told to return the following week with additional documentation that the bank's own policy did not actually require. His informal complaint, filed 2 weeks later, described the experience in plain, careful language. He had written it by hand, Dixie could tell. The typed version in the file had the rhythm of someone who had chosen each word deliberately, the way people do when they aren't used to filing complaints and want to get it exactly right. At the bottom of the complaint form, in the section marked Desired Resolution, Harvey Galler had written 4 words. "I just want answers." He had received none. His complaint had been dismissed with a form letter. 2 days after his visit to the bank, Harvey Galler had a mild cardiac episode. He was hospitalized overnight. His family believed it was stress-related. He had never pursued legal action. Mara tapped the file with 2 fingers. He didn't think anyone would listen. Dixie read the 4 words again. "I just want answers." She set the file down carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you're not careful. "I want to find him," she said. "Dixie, not as a legal strategy." She looked at Mara directly. "As a person, before anything else." She paused. "Then, as a legal strategy." Mara studied her for a moment, then she pulled up the complaint form on her laptop, found the contact information Harvey Galler had written at the top, and slid the laptop toward Dixie. Dixie looked at the address, memorized it, slid the laptop back. "What does this do to the case?" she asked. Mara leaned back in her chair. "It changes everything," she said quietly. "One incident is an incident. The bank can frame it as a misunderstanding, an overzealous employee, an isolated mistake." She gestured at the 6 files spread across the table. 6 incidents, all targeting black customers, none confirmed fraudulent, 2 complaints buried. That's not a mistake. She paused. That's a pattern. And a pattern is a case. Dixie looked at the files laid out in a row. 6 names, 6 people who had walked into that bank and been treated like suspects for no reason, except the way they looked. 6 people the bank had quietly filed away and forgotten. She thought about Harvey Galler sitting down to write that complaint by hand, choosing each word carefully, hoping someone might actually read it. Someone finally had. I'm going to see him Saturday, Dixie said. Mara said, Dixie, this could change everything. Dixie looked at her. That's the point, she said. Harvey Galler lived on a quiet street lined with oak trees. Dixie found the house without trouble. A neat single-story home with a small front porch and a garden along the walkway that someone tended carefully. Marigolds mostly. Deep orange and yellow, still bright even this late in the season. She sat in her car for a moment before getting out. Not because she was nervous, exactly. Because she wanted to arrive as a person, not as an attorney. She wanted to leave the portfolio in the car and the legal language with it. She knocked at 9:30 on a Saturday morning. The woman who opened the door was small and sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back and an apron that suggested Dixie had arrived in the middle of something domestic and important. This was May Galler. She looked Dixie over once, quickly, thoroughly, and then stepped back and held the door open. He's in the kitchen, May said. I'll get the tea. Harvey Galler was a big man who had gotten smaller with age. Broad shoulders that had settled, large hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He stood when Dixie came in, which she hadn't expected, and shook her hand with a grip that still had something behind it. They sat across from each other at a round kitchen table covered with a yellow cloth. May set 2 glasses of sweet tea between them and went back to whatever she'd been doing, though Dixie noticed she stayed within earshot. Harvey looked at Dixie for a moment, measuring. I saw you on the news, he said. I figured, Dixie said. That woman at the bank. He shook his head slowly. Foster. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. I wasn't going to talk to anybody about what happened to me. My daughter wanted me to go to a lawyer right after. I told her it wasn't worth it. He paused. Told her nobody was going to listen to an old man complaining about a bank. Dixie didn't rush to fill the silence. Tell me what happened, she said. Your version. From the beginning. Harvey told her. He told her about the sale of the house he and May had lived in for 31 years, raised their children in, paid off over 20 years of careful budgeting and working overtime when overtime was available. He told her about the cashier's check, how he'd held it in his jacket pocket on the drive to the bank because it felt important to keep it close. He told her about arriving at First Meridian Bank on a Wednesday morning. The same branch, the same lobby. He told her about Linda Foster. The questions that started reasonable and got stranger. The holds on the transaction that came without explanation. The employees cycling in and out, each one asking him to verify something he had already verified. He had his ID. He had the check. He had the closing documents from the sale. He had everything. 4 hours. He sat in that bank for 4 hours. At one point, a security guard had stood near him, not doing anything, not saying anything, just standing nearby in a way that was meant to be felt. Harvey had felt it. He had finally been told to come back the following week with additional paperwork. He had asked what paperwork. The answer was vague. He had gone home. 2 days later, he'd woken up at 3 in the morning with a pressure in his chest that scared him enough to wake May. She had driven him to the emergency room. The doctors had kept him overnight. He said all of this evenly, without drama. The way people tell stories they have told before inside their own heads, over and over, until the sharp edges have worn down into something they can carry. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. May had stopped moving around behind them. Dixie reached across the yellow tablecloth and placed her hand over Harvey's. The bank buried your complaint, she said. They received it, reviewed it, and dismissed it with a form letter. You did everything right, Harvey. They just decided you weren't worth answering. Harvey looked down at her hand on his. His jaw moved once. I want to tell your story alongside mine, Dixie said. Not because it helps my case, though it does. but because what happened to you matters. You matter. And you deserve the answers they never gave you. She paused. Will you let us fight for that? Harvey looked up at her. His eyes were steady. He looked at May. May gave one firm nod. Harvey turned back to Dixie. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. May's voice came from behind them, low and certain. It's about time. Dixie almost smiled. She picked up her sweet tea and held it with both hands. Outside, the marigolds moved in a small wind. Dixie's phone woke her at 5:47 in the morning. She reached for it in the dark, expecting Mara. The screen showed 17 unread messages. She sat up in bed and read the first one from her law school roommate. Dixie, please tell me you've seen this already. Call me. She opened the next. Then the next. By the fifth message, she already knew what had happened. She didn't need to read the others. She opened the first news link someone had sent her and sat there in the dark of her bedroom reading it with the phone held close to her face. Someone had leaked her juvenile record. One incident. When Dixie was 16 years old, she had shoplifted a jacket from a department store. She had been caught, processed, assigned community service, and the charge had been expunged when she turned 18. Legally, it did not exist. It had never appeared on her bar application, her background checks, her security clearances. Not because she had hidden it, because the law said it was gone. It was not gone anymore. 2 online outlets had published it overnight. A local television station had picked it up by 5 in the morning. The framing was precise and devastating. A woman with a history of theft claiming she was profiled at a bank. They used the word expunged once, buried in the 4th paragraph, in a sentence that moved past it so quickly you had to go back to find it. The headline didn't mention it at all. Dixie read the headline 3 times. Then she set her phone face down on the nightstand and sat in the quiet for a moment. She thought about being 16. She thought about the jacket, dark green, something she had wanted badly and couldn't afford and had made a terrible decision about. She thought about her father's face when he came to pick her up. Not angry. Worse than angry. Disappointed in the particular way that only people who love you completely can manage. She had cried in the car on the way home. She had never stolen anything again. She had been a child. She picked her phone back up and called Mara. Mara was already awake. I know, she said, before Dixie finished her first sentence. I've been up since 4. I'm already working on identifying the source. Whoever accessed that record did so illegally. Sealed juvenile records have restricted access, and there will be a log. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that Dixie recognized as genuine fury being very tightly managed. This is not a setback. This is a crime, and we are going to treat it exactly like that. The hearing is in 3 days, Dixie said. I know. We go. We don't acknowledge this publicly before then. We let them think it worked. Dixie was quiet. Did it work? Mara asked carefully. No, Dixie said. The preliminary hearing proceeded as planned. Judge Vance was exactly what his reputation promised. Old school, unhurried, with sharp eyes that moved between attorneys the way a man moves when he has heard every argument twice and is waiting for someone to say something new. He listened to Mara present the pattern of Linda Foster's 6 flagged transactions, Richard's footage, the suspicious gap in Pemberton's body camera record, and the department's equipment malfunction explanation. When the department's attorney offered that explanation, Vance looked at him over his glasses and said nothing for a long moment. The attorney kept talking. Vance let him finish. Then he moved on without comment, which was somehow worse. At the close of the hearing, Vance indicated clearly that he was inclined to allow the case to proceed to full trial. The bank's attorneys requested a recess. Mara kept her expression neutral. Outside the courtroom, she squeezed Dixie's arm once, quick and firm. Harvey Galler, seated in the gallery, was smiling quietly. General Worth, in civilian clothes at the back of the room, gave his daughter a single nod. It felt like a turning point. It wasn't. Not yet. That evening, Dixie's managing partner called for the third time. Ryan Harlan had been patient. By his own estimation, he had suggested a leave of absence. He had asked her to consider the firm's relationships. Now his voice had lost its careful softness. He asked for her resignation. Dixie listened to him without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I'll have my things cleared by Friday." She did not slam the phone down. She did not raise her voice. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface. Harvey Galler called 20 minutes later to check on her. She told him about the resignation. He was quiet. Then he said, "My wife says we're not backing down." May's voice was clear in the background. "Tell her that's right." Dixie pressed her lips together hard. It was the closest she came to breaking that night. Friday came and went. Dixie cleared her desk at the firm in 40 minutes. She did it methodically. Files into boxes, personal items into a bag, the framed copy of her law license off the wall, and wrapped in a spare jacket so the glass wouldn't break. She didn't linger. She didn't look at her office the way people sometimes look at places they are leaving for the last time, searching for something to hold on to. She had already decided what came next. She just needed the tools to get there. Mara called on Monday morning, 9 days after the hearing. Dixie was sitting at her kitchen table with a legal pad, a pen, and a fresh cup of coffee, working through the outline for her new practice. She had been doing this every morning since Friday, mapping the structure of something that didn't exist yet, which was the same process she had used her entire career when preparing a case from scratch. You started with what you knew. Then you built toward what you needed to prove. She answered on the first ring. The access logs came back, Mara said. Dixie set her pen down. "Tell me," Mara told her. The subpoena for the sealed juvenile records access log had required demonstrating that an illegal disclosure had occurred. Not difficult, given that the record had appeared in 2 news outlets and a television broadcast. The log had come back within the week. It contained a timestamp, a terminal ID, and a user credential. The credential belonged to Sergeant Kevin Brooke. Dixie didn't speak for a moment. She turned it over carefully in her mind, the way she turned over every piece of evidence, checking the weight of it, testing the edges, making sure she understood exactly what it meant before she said anything about it. Brooke had accessed Dixie's sealed juvenile record from a law enforcement terminal 48 hours after the arrest. He had then forwarded it from his personal email account to a contact with media connections. The forward was time-stamped. The recipient's email domain matched the outlet that had published the story first. This was not a leak in the casual sense of the word. An overheard conversation, a careless remark, someone talking when they shouldn't have. This was deliberate. This was targeted. This was a sergeant accessing sealed court records that he had no legal grounds to access and weaponizing the information inside them to discredit a woman he had helped put in handcuffs. A woman who had done nothing wrong. A woman who had been 16 years old when that record was created. He went after a 16-year-old girl, Dixie said. Her voice was very quiet. Because he had nothing else. Yes, Mara said. File it. Already drafted. Mara paused. Dixie, this goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This isn't a civil matter anymore. Illegal disclosure of sealed juvenile records is a federal offense. We are talking about criminal exposure for Brooke. Real criminal exposure. Dixie was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. Mara filed directly with the U.S. Attorney's Office that afternoon. The filing was detailed and precise. Access logs, timestamps, email records. The published articles demonstrating the disclosure had reached the public. Every piece of evidence laid out in a clear, unbroken chain from Brooks Terminal to the morning Dixie had woken up to 17 messages in the dark. Dixie called her father that evening. General Worth picked up on the second ring. She told him what they had found: the access logs, Brooks' credentials, the federal filing. She told him clearly and without dramatics, the same way she presented evidence in court. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that she checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Then he said, "I told you I'd be standing right here." Dixie looked at the legal pad on her kitchen table, the outline for her new practice, the name she had written at the top of the first page. "I know, Dad," she said. Another pause. "Are you all right?" he asked. She considered the question honestly, the way he had raised her to consider things. "I'm better than all right," she said. "I'm close." Worth was quiet for a moment. She knew that silence. It was the silence of a man exercising restraint, choosing trust over his own instinct to act. He had been standing to the side of this fight since the beginning, respecting her need to lead it. She knew what that cost him. "I'm proud of you," he said. Simple. No qualifications. Dixie pressed her hand flat against the legal pad. "I know that too," she said. The call came on a Thursday morning. 1 week had passed since Mara filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Dixie had spent that week drafting the articles of incorporation for her new practice, researching office space in a building 3 blocks from the courthouse, reaching out to 2 former colleagues she trusted completely to gauge their interest in joining her. She was not waiting. She had never been good at waiting. She worked instead, the way she had always worked when things were uncertain. Forward, methodically, one concrete step at a time. Her phone rang at 10:15. It was Mara, but not Mara's regular voice. This was a different register. Controlled, careful, the voice of someone holding something large very steadily. "You need to come in," Mara said. "Now?" "Now." Mara was standing when Dixie arrived, which was unusual. Mara was a woman who sat down to work, planted, focused, still. She was standing at her window with her back to the door, and she turned when Dixie came in. "The federal investigation flagged something in the department's server infrastructure," she said. "Something the department didn't disclose. Something they apparently believed no one would find." She turned her laptop around on the desk. Dixie sat down and looked at the screen. Pemberton's body camera footage had not been lost to a malfunction. The federal investigators, working through the department's server system as part of the Brooke investigation, had found the deletion record. Someone had manually accessed the department's primary footage server 8 hours after Dixie's arrest and deleted the file containing Pemberton's complete body camera recording. The deletion had been executed under a specific terminal and a specific user credential. Kevin Brooke, the same man who had called Pemberton and told him to stand down. The same man who had written the report describing the arrest as procedurally appropriate. The same man who had accessed Dixie's sealed juvenile record and forwarded it to a journalist. Brooke had not just covered for Pemberton after the fact. He had gone into the system and removed the evidence. But the department had a backup server, an older system, a redundancy built into the infrastructure years ago during a tech upgrade that no one had bothered to decommission because decommissioning old servers required paperwork, and the paperwork had never been filed. It sat quietly in the building's server room, running automatically, storing copies of footage files at 24-hour intervals. Brooke hadn't known about it. Nobody had thought to tell him, because nobody was supposed to need to know. The backup had retained the complete original file. "They recovered it this morning," Mara said. "All of it." The footage ran for 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Dixie watched it in full, sitting in Mara's office with the door closed and the blinds angled against the afternoon light. She watched Pemberton walk through the bank's front doors and move directly to Linda Foster without a glance toward Dixie. She watched Linda lean in and speak to him in a low voice, her body language relaxed. The posture of a woman who had made a call and was now watching it be handled. She watched herself extend her bar card toward Pemberton, watched him take it from her hand and set it on the counter without reading it. She watched herself speak, clearly and calmly, and watched Pemberton talk over her. She watched her hand move toward her portfolio pocket, watched Pemberton's hand close around her wrist. She watched the handcuffs. She had known all of this. She had lived all of this. But watching it from the outside, from the angle of a camera that caught everything with the flat indifference of a machine that had no reason to lie, that was something different. Then Mara showed her the parking lot footage. It was an exterior camera, angled toward the bank's entrance, and it had captured something that no one had thought to look for because no one had known there was anything to find. Timestamp, 9:21 a.m. 2 minutes before Pemberton entered the bank. Brooke's car was in the lot. Brooke and Pemberton stood beside it. The audio was limited. Wind noise, traffic. But the forensic enhancement was clear enough. Brooke's voice. Foster called it in. Just process it quick. Pemberton nodded. Then he walked inside. Mara stopped the footage. The office was completely silent. Dixie sat very still. This was not one officer making a bad call in the moment. This was not implicit bias playing out unconsciously in a split-second decision. This was two men in a parking lot agreeing to arrest a woman they had never met before. Either of them had laid eyes on her. It had been decided before Pemberton ever walked through those doors. Mara sat down slowly across from her. "Dixie," she said quietly, "it's over for them." Dixie looked at the paused image on the laptop screen. Brooke and Pemberton standing beside a car in a parking lot, captured by a server nobody remembered existed. "Yes," she said, "it is." The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Mara had filed the motion the same afternoon Dixie watched the parking lot footage. An emergency petition citing newly recovered evidence, obstruction of justice, and deliberate destruction of court-relevant materials. Judge Vance had read it the following morning and scheduled the hearing for 6 days out, which in court terms was nearly immediate. Those 6 days were not quiet. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed publicly that Kevin Brooke was under federal investigation. The department released a statement saying it was cooperating fully, which was the kind of language that meant the opposite of what it said. Brooke had been placed on unpaid suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. His union had not yet responded to press inquiries. Dixie spent those 6 days preparing. Not for the hearing. That was Mara's territory, and Dixie had learned by now to respect that boundary, but for what came after. She signed the lease on her new office space. She had 2 conversations with former colleagues that moved from gauging interest to serious discussion. She drafted a client agreement template and had it reviewed by a contracts attorney she trusted. She was not waiting for the hearing to tell her whether she had a future. She already knew she had a future. She just wanted to watch the people who tried to take it from her answer for what they had done. The courtroom was full. Dixie sat at the plaintiff's table with Mara. Harvey Galler was in the gallery, 3rd row, with May beside him. Richard Foster sat 1 row back, big hands resting on his knees, wearing a jacket and tie that he had clearly pressed carefully. General Marvin Worth was at the far end of the back row in dark civilian clothes, his posture the same whether he was in uniform or not, completely still, completely present. The department's attorney sat at the defense table with 2 colleagues and a row of folders that suggested a strategy of volume. Bury the other side in paper and process, and hope the judge lost the thread. Judge Harry Vance did not lose threads. He entered at 9 o'clock precisely, settled into his chair, and looked out at the room with the unhurried patience of a man who had presided over enough hearings to know within the first 5 minutes how most of them would end. Mara presented the case in 40 minutes. She was methodical, and she was merciless. She began with the recovered footage, the body camera recording that captured every minute of the escalation inside the bank, every document Pemberton had dismissed, every time Dixie had cited her rights and been told to stop talking. She presented the deletion record showing Brooke had manually removed the file from the primary server 8 hours after the arrest. She presented the parking lot footage. Brooke and Pemberton, 2 minutes before Pemberton entered the bank. Brooke's voice telling him to process it quick. She presented the access logs for Dixie's sealed juvenile record. Brooke's credentials, the timestamp, the forwarded email. She presented the federal filing and the U.S. Attorney's confirmation that Brooke was under active criminal investigation. She laid it all out in sequence, piece by piece, without editorial. She didn't need editorial. The facts were doing the work. The department's attorney rose to respond. He was a practiced speaker, smooth, measured, the kind of attorney who had built a career on making complicated things sound simple, and simple things sound complicated. He began by acknowledging that certain procedural irregularities had come to light, and that the department took those irregularities seriously. He then offered a revised explanation for the footage gap. He had barely finished his second sentence when Judge Vance looked at him over the rim of his glasses. He kept talking. Vance let him finish. Every word. Then the courtroom went very quiet. Vance set his pen down on the bench with a precise, deliberate motion. He looked at the department's attorney for a moment. Then he looked at his notes. Then he looked back up at the room. When he spoke, his voice was even and unhurried, and carried the particular weight of someone who had considered every word before selecting it. He said that what had been presented before the court that morning represented a coordinated effort to obstruct justice, the deliberate destruction of evidence, the illegal access and disclosure of sealed records, and the falsification of an incident report. He called it, in plain language, an affront to the integrity of the court and to the individuals who had been harmed by it. He granted the emergency injunction against the department. He appointed a special master to conduct an independent review of every case handled by Brooke and Pemberton in the preceding 5 years. He ordered Brooke's suspension without pay to remain in effect pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. He did not raise his voice once. He didn't need to. Brooke's attorney was on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office before the hearing ended. Dixie learned this from Mara, who learned it from a contact in the federal building. Brooke was looking to cooperate. Brooke was looking to trade what he knew about departmental culture and supervisory practices for consideration on his own charges. Brooke, it turned out, was not as loyal to the machine as the machine had assumed. The gallery began to move as the session closed. Dixie gathered her documents. She was aware of Harvey rising behind her, of May saying something quiet to him, of Richard standing slowly with his hand on the back of the pew. She stood and turned. At the far end of the back row, General Marvin Worth caught her eye across the length of the courtroom. He nodded once. She nodded back. It was enough. The days after Judge Vance's ruling moved fast. Not chaotic fast, purposeful fast. The kind of momentum that builds when a structure that has been holding things back finally gives way, and everything that was waiting behind it starts moving at once. Dixie had seen it happen in cases before. The long, grinding stillness of litigation, and then a ruling, a disclosure, a piece of evidence that changes the weight of everything. And suddenly, all the pieces that had been locked in place started falling exactly where they were supposed to fall. This was that moment. She watched it happen from her new office, 3 blocks from the courthouse, where the desk was second-hand, and the view was a parking structure, and the space smelled like fresh paint. She had moved in 2 days after signing the lease. She didn't wait for furniture to be perfect or walls to be decorated. She brought her law license, her laptop, her legal pads, and a coffee maker. It was enough. Dion Pemberton was terminated on a Monday. Not suspended, not reassigned. Terminated, effective immediately, following the department's review of the recovered footage. The footage that showed, without ambiguity, exactly what had happened inside First Meridian Bank and in the parking lot 2 minutes before. His union was given the opportunity to review the same footage. They declined to represent him. Dixie heard this from Mara on a Tuesday afternoon and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Good." Not with satisfaction, exactly. With the particular finality of a door being closed on something that should have been closed a long time ago. Linda Foster's fall was quieter, but no less complete. First Meridian Bank's corporate headquarters had spent the 2 weeks since Mara's court filings conducting their own internal review. One motivated less by conscience than by the growing certainty that what was coming would be significantly worse if they appeared to be dragging their feet. What they found when they actually looked at Linda Foster's record was the same thing Mara had found. 6 flagged transactions, all targeting black customers, none confirmed fraudulent, 2 buried complaints. Linda was placed on administrative leave pending termination proceedings. The bank's legal team called Mara on a Wednesday morning and requested a meeting to discuss settlement. Their tone was careful and cooperative in the way that institutions become careful and cooperative when they understand the full shape of what they are facing. Mara called Dixie immediately after. "They want to settle," she said. "Harvey first," Dixie said. "Already told them," Mara said. The settlement negotiation for Harvey Galler took 4 days. Mara handled it with the precision of someone who had done this before and knew exactly where the pressure points were. The bank's attorneys came in with a number. Mara countered. They moved. She moved less. By the end of the 4th day, Harvey Galler had a settlement that covered every medical expense from his overnight hospitalization, additional damages for emotional distress and lost time, and a formal written acknowledgement from the bank that his treatment had been discriminatory and wrong. There was also a public statement. The bank's CEO issued it personally. It named Harvey Galler. It described what had happened to him at First Meridian Bank. It used the word discriminatory twice and the phrase "we failed you" once. It was not perfect language, but it was true language, and it was public, and Harvey Galler's name was in it. Dixie called Harvey the evening the statement was released. "The settlement is finalized," she said. "It's done." There was a long silence on the line. Then she heard May's voice in the background. Not words at first, just a sound. The sound of someone exhaling something they had been holding for a very long time. Harvey said, "She kept her word, May." May said something back, quiet and certain. Harvey came back to the phone. His voice was different, looser, lighter, like something had been set down that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. "Thank you," he said. "Dixie, thank you." Ryan Harlan called that same evening. His voice had the quality of a man who had watched events unfold from a distance and was now recalibrating what he had said and done in light of how things had turned out. He said the firm had acted hastily. He said Dixie's handling of the situation had been, in his view, exemplary. He said he wanted her back. He was prepared to offer a named partnership. Her name on the door, a senior position, terms they could discuss at her convenience. Dixie listened to all of it. Then she said, "Ryan, I appreciate that. I genuinely do." She looked at the second-hand desk in her new office, the law license on the wall, the coffee maker on the filing cabinet. "But I'm not coming back," she said. "I'm already somewhere else." She told him about the new practice. He was quiet for a moment, the silence of a man recalculating. "Your first client?" he asked. Harvey Galler, she said. His case against the city is very much alive. Harlan said he understood. Dixie thanked him again and hung up. She pulled her legal pad toward her and wrote Harvey Galler's name at the top of a fresh page. Below it, she wrote, Case against the city, Phase 2. She uncapped her pen. She got to work. The courthouse steps were wide and white and caught the morning sun straight on. Dixie had chosen the location deliberately. Not the bank, not the police department's building, the courthouse, because that was where the truth had been told, officially and on the record, and she wanted to stand in front of it when she said what she had to say. She arrived 40 minutes early. She stood at the top of the steps in a dark blazer and dark slacks, her hair down for the first time in weeks, and watched the small crowd gather below her. Journalists with cameras, community members who had seen the news and come anyway, a row of people she didn't know who stood quietly along the edge of the steps with the particular patience of people who had been waiting for something like this for a long time. Richard Foster arrived at 8:40. He was wearing the same jacket and tie from the hearing, freshly pressed again. He climbed the steps and took his place to Dixie's left without being asked. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Harvey and May Galler arrived at 8:55. Harvey moved more slowly up the steps than Dixie would have liked, and she watched him without making it obvious she was watching. May had her hand through his arm. At the top, Harvey straightened up and stood beside Dixie on her right, and May stood beside him, and the four of them faced the crowd together. Mara Orban took her place one step behind Dixie. General Marvin Worth arrived last, on foot, alone, in dark civilian clothes. He moved through the edge of the crowd without announcement and found a place at the back. He didn't look for Dixie's eyes. He just stood there, his hands clasped in front of him, completely still. She found him anyway. Dixie had no notes. She had thought about writing something, had sat at her new desk 2 evenings ago with a legal pad and a pen, and tried to organize what she wanted to say into the kind of clear, structured argument she had been trained to construct. But everything she wrote felt like a brief, and this wasn't a brief. This wasn't an argument to be won. She put the pen down and decided to just tell the truth. She spoke clearly and without rushing. She described what had happened at First Meridian Bank on a Tuesday morning. She described presenting her identification, her bar card, her client's signed authorization. She described Linda Foster picking up a phone. She described Officer Dion Pemberton setting her bar card on the counter without reading it. She described the handcuffs. She described the 6 customers. She said their existence out loud, in public, so that the people who had been invisible in Linda Foster's filing system were invisible no longer. 6 people who had walked into that bank and been treated as suspects. 6 complaints and delays and quiet humiliations that the bank had filed away and forgotten. She described Harvey Galler spending 4 hours in that lobby with a cashier's check from the sale of his home in his jacket pocket. Harvey stood beside her and did not look away from the crowd. She described the deleted footage. She described Brooks' credentials on the access log. She described waking up at 5:47 in the morning to 17 messages about a record that the law said did not exist. She said, "They went after a mistake I made when I was 16 years old, a child's mistake, because it was the only ammunition they had left." The crowd was very still. I want everyone here to understand something. They didn't come after me because I was weak. They came after me because they thought the machine they had built was strong enough to hold. It wasn't. She looked at Harvey, then back at the cameras. It won't hold any of us. 3 months passed. Dion Pemberton worked the early shift at a parking structure on the east side of the city. He sat in a booth the size of a closet and took tickets and made change and watched cars move in and out. No uniform, no badge, No one who drove past gave him a second look. Harvey and May Galler sat on their front porch on a Saturday afternoon in the kind of light that makes everything look a little warmer than it is. Harvey had his tablet in his lap. He had been reading an article about Dixie's new practice, a profile in a legal publication, her name in the headline. He set the tablet down on the armrest and looked out at the marigolds along the walkway. "She kept her word," he said. May reached over and put her hand on top of his. "I told you she would," she said. Dixie Worth was at her desk. The office was fuller now than it had been a month ago. 2 associates, a paralegal, a proper chair, a rug that covered most of the floor. The second-hand desk was still there. She hadn't replaced it. She had decided she liked it. On the wall, her law license. On the desk, a photograph. Not her firm headshot. Not a formal portrait. A snapshot from a picnic, slightly overexposed. The colors faded at the edges the way old photographs fade. She was maybe 7 years old in it. Her father was beside her, his head thrown back, laughing at something outside the frame. She was laughing too, though she couldn't remember anymore what the joke had been. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were both in it. Her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. New client, probably. Someone who had seen the press conference or read the profile or heard about the case from someone who knew someone. She had been getting calls like this for 3 weeks. She picked up. "Dixie Worth," she said. "How can I help you?" Outside her window, the city kept moving. She listened. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.